Okay, hello everyone. I'm Chihiro Haga from Osaka University, Japan. I'm here today to talk about our scenario analysis of nexuses between renewable energy, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. Many scenario analyses of ecosystem services are focusing on our use of nature, but our situation is quite different. We are also facing the situation of underuse of nature. So why we are concerned about underuse of nature? That is because population is declining and aging rate is increasing towards 2050 in Japan. Official future population estimation shows that about 30% of population will be disappeared and residential area will be shrink. Yellow grids in the right figure indicates that population will be zero in 2050. This trend is significant in rural areas. So in the Japanese context, transformation can also mean how to deal with this population decline. Depopulation will alter the state of ecosystems. In forests, the poorly managed old growth forests are increasing. Previous studies concern about the risk of disasters and low carbon sequestration capacity. And on the other hand, in the abandoned farmland, that is transitioning to forests or remaining to be grassland. This transition will promote the expansion of wildlife habitats such as bears or deers. So the change will cause a conflict between human society and wildlife. And recently, renewable energy has been introduced into such marginal lands. This introduction requires careful consideration of ecological impact. So population decline is a key indirect driver of landscape change and a key constraint of social capital for management activity. Our case study site is Bekambeushi-river Basin in northeastern Japan. 70% of watershed is forest and 20% is grassland. The major industry in this region is aquaculture, pastureland for dairy farming, and forestry. And in this region, population decline is a serious problem too. By 2050, the population will be decreased to the half of current level. So what we want to know is the consequences of social ecological systems if we transform our social conditions. Okay, so first, we tried to explore plausible future scenarios in shrinking society using scenarios and models. And then we have conducted seeking approaches to design transformation. In our PANCES project, first, we developed a national scale scenario narratives representing the plausible social condition in 2050 in Japan, like this one. The PANCES scenario consisted of two axes. The vertical axis shows the people's preference of capital to use. So natural capital based or produced capital based. And horizontal axis shows the distribution of residential population. So in urban compactification scenario, people were moved to the city center. And on the other hand, dispersed population scenario remains for people to be lived in rural areas. So we translated these national scale narratives into the local context. The vertical axis of PANCES scenario is describing self-sufficiency rate. So we translated it to how much we will manage forest or pasture land. And population distribution on the horizontal axis were translated to where to maintain landscape management practices. And these quantitative scenario settings were input to the spatially explicit simulation model to simulate the vegetation dynamics under each scenario. In our case study, we applied the widely used forest landscape model, LANDIS-II, in combination with a local forest inventory database. And we used the model output to evaluate the multiple ecosystem services. And our results showed that biodiversity and ecosystem services respond to future scenarios. For example, future population distribution affected the spatial arrangement of abandoned pasture land, which in turn affected the landscape structure and biodiversity. And timber and pasture yield increased in scenarios that utilize natural resources in the region. And in terms of carbon sequestration service, the major carbon sink was deferred between the scenarios that increased from then BAU scenario. So our result suggested that transformation in people's preference of local natural capitals to use and in the selection of residents in the future is a key for changing local nature and nature's contributions to people, even if in a shrinking society. After we explored plausible futures, we tried to seek the pathway to achieve transformation in terms of decarbonization and biodiversity conservation at the same time. After the Paris Agreement, there is a movement to convert increasing abandoned farmland into land for producing renewable energy for the decarbonization of local society. In our case study sites, a solar PV system was installed on some marginal lands or near wetlands, but as many researchers reported, such renewable energy installation will cause conflicts with local ecosystems, depending on the type of renewable energy and site selection. Renewable energy installation for decarbonization and biodiversity conservation are both important, of course. So we tried to answer the question, how to strike a balance between decarbonization and biodiversity conservation. So we analyzed 62 future scenarios depending on how much pasture land would be abandoned and used for renewable energy production, and which renewable energy types will be introduced. And to identify which farmland will be abandoned, we calculated the manageability of each pasture land using the population dataset. So we computed the manageability using population and geographical dataset, and we ranked each farmland as follows. So the farmland with lower value will be abandoned first. And we utilized the LANDIS-II model, and we input such future scenarios about landscape management in terms of farmland abandonment and renewable energy installation. And this LANDIS-II compute the ecological processes and spatial processes. And we evaluated the ecological impact and energy production from the output of LANDIS-II model. And this LANDIS-II model computes the vegetation dynamics like this slide. The figure on the left side shows the business as usual scenarios. So all the pastureland were maintained to be managed towards 2100. And green color, that is showing the location of pasture grass, was maintained. And on the other hand, in the figures right, low manageability farmland was abandoned first. Then the pioneer species were established on such abandoned farmlands, and many abandoned farmlands were shifted to forest. Okay, so first, I will show you the ecological impact and energy supply of the case where only woody biomass is introduced into abandoned pastureland. If we increase abandoned pastureland for woody biomass production, the broadleaf forest was increased. First, I will show you the ecological impact and energy supply of the case where only woody biomass is introduced into abandoned pastureland. If we increase abandoned pastureland for woody biomass production, the broadleaf forest was increased and ecological indicators were improved. On the other hand, as we were installing solar PV system, a large amount of energy was expected to be supplied, but 3 ecological indicators were reduced. So the result showed that the clear trade-off between renewable energy production and local biodiversity. And our result also provided the scientific data for designing the best mixture of renewable energy. The horizontal and vertical axis shows the expected renewable energy production and biodiversity impacts. Each plot indicated 62 cases. There was a trade-off between the 2 axes, and we can learn a lot from this figure. The orange cases with a large amount of solar PV can provide more energy than the local demand, but this case will lose biodiversity. And as shown in blue plot, a mixture of medium-scale solar PV and woody biomass can meet the balance between demand and supply and can improve biodiversity values. And if we utilize only woody biomass, energy was lower than the current local demand level, but had the highest biodiversity values. So the transformation of decarbonization and biodiversity conservation requires discussing the future energy demand, which is highly related to their lifestyle and multiple SDGs. Okay, let me summarize my talk. Our team was conducted some scenario analysis in Bekambeushi-river Watershed in northern Japan to seeking the pathways to achieve both transformation of regional energy and biodiversity conservation. And we utilized the forest landscape simulation model, and we simulated the consequences of each scenario. And our results showed that rewilding of abundant land will increase the habitat of rare birds. And regeneration dynamics and climate change is a key source of uncertainty. But our result suggested that the mixture of biomass and small-scale solar PV is can meet the balance of renewable energy introduction and biodiversity conservation. So, yeah, this concludes my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention. And our results indicated that rewilding of abandoned land will increase the habitat of rare birds species. And regeneration dynamics under climate change was a key source of uncertainty. And our results also suggested that mixture of biomass and small-scale solar PV is recommended. So we need to discuss more about how much energy which is provided by altering the local landscape is needed in the future. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention.